Hello, and welcome to this UIA webinar. My name is Susanna Forgen, and I'm a Project Officer at the Urban Innovative Actions Permanent Secretariat. Today, we will explore the intervention logic and the work plan as part of our support for applicants of the third call for proposals that UIA launched last year. So, the call opened on the 15th of December 2017 and will remain open until the 30th of March 2018. We have a budget of between 80 to 100 million euros to give urban authorities in order to test their innovative solutions, and we will be focusing on 4 topics. These are the adaptation to climate change, air quality, housing, and jobs and skills in the local economy. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that we are hosting and recording during the month of January and February in order to help applicants. We will pre-record our webinars and then hold question and answer sessions in order to help and support those applicants that have specific questions for the Permanent Secretariat. As I mentioned, it is a series of webinars. We have a webinar on partnership. We have a webinar on focusing on the budget and the eligibility of costs, and we will have a webinar on the management and communication at local and European level. The information provided in these webinars are a complement to the applicant seminars that the UIA initiative is hosting during the months of January and February in order to give applicants further information on all the procedures and rules in order to put together an application form and submit under the third call for proposals. So today's webinar focuses on strengthening the intervention logic and the work plan. So why do we focus today on these elements of your application form? Well, we do so because it is an important part of the scoring of your application form. So the intervention logic and the work plan will be assessed by the Permanent Secretariat under the operational assessment, and this accounts for 20% of the weighting of the final scoring of your proposal. But the intervention logic also has an important element also in the strategic assessment, which accounts for the 80% of the weighting of your scoring, where specifically results and objectives will be evaluated by a panel of external experts. So it is increasingly important for you to pay attention to the different elements that you must include in your application form. A good intervention logic and a good work plan will set the basis for a good project implementation. So it's important to start on a good foot and on a good basis. And finally, working on your intervention logic and your work plan will allow you to co-design, co-create, and co-develop your solution with your partners, which we have seen is really the way to propose an innovative solution. During this webinar, we will focus on 2 main elements. The first one will be strengthening your intervention logic. What are the main concepts and the elements that you must pay attention to? And secondly, we will be looking at the work plan. Now, in section 1, we will look to strengthen your intervention logic by looking at the main concepts and points to pay attention to. So firstly, what is an intervention logic? The intervention logic is the way that the project is designed to constitute an overall results framework. So your intervention logic should explain how it contributes to those expected results that you want to achieve, and also will constitute the basis in order to assess the effectiveness of the project action plans towards the achievement of those expected results. The intervention logic is made up of different elements, and we would like to go through them one by one with you in order to define them, provide you with examples, in order to make also the difference with the definition of these elements in other EU programs, which may lead in some occasions to some confusion for applicants. So firstly, we will look at the objective. So what is the objective? The objective is the ambition, the strategic and long-term change that you seek with your project on the socio-economic situation and in benefit for the target groups. So the objective should be expressed when describing them as follows, using the following tenses. To improve, so for instance, to improve the quality of air, to reduce the number of carbon emissions, and to increase, for instance, the number of people using bicycles to travel to work. So these would be examples of how to express these objectives. In order to organize your objectives and to write them down, you should always remember that they should be SMART objectives. What do we mean by this? We mean that they should be specific, they should be measurable, they should be achievable, realistic, and time-bound. The objective section of your application form will be found in Part C, where you will be able to fill them in and list them. It's important that you become familiar with the UIA application form and its different sections in order to establish also where they should be placed and also how many characters you may need in order to describe them. We're looking at our second element, results. So what do we mean by results? These are the expected mid-term change in the local situation as a result of the project that you seek to implement. So as we did for the previous element, we would recommend that you express the results using the following tenses. So improved, reduced, increased. So for instance, if I work on an example such as the one I used previously on air quality, we could say that there is an improved quality of health for citizens in a specific neighborhood. There is a reduction in the air emissions, pollutants that are emitted into the air by a certain figure. There is an increased number of people exercising on their bicycles to go to work. So that those could be examples for you to use as results. Remember that results can be both quantitative and qualitative, so please bear in mind that you may have to include both types. And also that, as before, they should be realistic, specific, concrete, and measurable. And these are very important elements to remember once you're putting together your results. UIA as an initiative does not set a number of result indicators such as other ERDF programs do. So please bear this in mind, because we are giving you the freedom to establish your own indicators, but we want to see them and you should include them in your application form. Also bear in mind that the Urban Innovative Actions Initiative is allowing urban authorities to experiment with innovative solutions never tested before at the EU level. And this means that this experimental purpose of the initiative, which also goes along with the results, is very important in order to be scored on your proposal, but also in terms of how you monitor and evaluate your project, which is also an important element that will be not only looked on in the strategic assessment, but also during the operational assessment. So please ensure that you work on this part, and that you consider that the results are part of the learning loop that you will implement within your project. In order to also further reinforce the importance of the results and how you include them, please bear in mind that the European Commission is expecting this in all its proposals. So it's not only convenient for you to think about them for your UIA proposal, but also for future proposals that you may be putting together. As before, the results will be developed in the section C of the UIA application form. The third element that I would like to explore with you is the outputs. And it's important that we define outputs, because in the past we've seen that there is a certain level of confusion between results and outputs. So by outputs we mean the main product of the project that has actually been produced with the funding received. So the outputs will have the aim of contributing to the achievement of the results that we've just explained. As before, outputs should also be realistic, specific, concrete, and measurable. And as a slight difference to the previous two elements, they will be developed in the section C and D of your application form. Please bear in, as an example of an output which is perhaps visible for everyone, if you are planning to have an investment in your application form and for your project, then the building itself would be an output. So it is a product that would then contribute to what you seek to achieve. So these are three elements that will also depend on indicators. So it's important to have an understanding of what we mean by indicators. So here in this table, you will have an overview of the three previous elements that I've explained with a certain example. And you will see when we look at result indicators that we mention a baseline and a target. It's important to have these two concepts defined and to differentiate them, because it's important when you're shaping your intervention logic. So what do we mean by baseline? Here we mean the value of the indicator before the intervention of your project. So what is pre-existing? What is the current situation that you intend to change? And I've put there as an example one for urban mobility, where we look at buses, and we see that, for example, we have a baseline figure for the average travel time before the implementation of your project. So it's figures that you should already know and have access to. And then we have a target that we want to achieve. So it's what will be that figure, that indicator, once your project has been completed. So it's something that you need to estimate using available resources, available knowledge, but also assumptions, because it's of course something that you are planning to do. So you may not have all the information needed in order to guess the exact figures. So for instance, if we use the above example for urban buses, what will be the target value is of this, how would this average travel time be improved by the increase of kilometers of bus lanes that would allow the vehicles to flow freely through the city without traffic. And you would match it with the unit costs of creating these bus lanes, but also with the available budget that you will have to develop them. So it's baseline is what we have before, and the target is what you seek to have after the project implementation. So the intervention logic is also further made up of three elements that we will describe in further detail when talking about the work plan. But it's also important to have the concepts defined. So the intervention logic will have work packages. So these are the main pillars of your project. They will have activities, which are parts of these work packages, which are specific tasks performed. Within these activities, you will have deliverables that can be of tangible or intangible nature that will help to deliver those activities, and is a side product of the project. And we will go into further detail later on in this webinar. These activities and deliverables will lead to the output. So remember, the product of your project that seeks to achieve the results, which are a consequence of the activities that you are implementing. So as a help for all those applicants, in order to get an overview of what we mean by the intervention logic, here you will find the main elements. So please become familiar with them. And in order to also further help you and give you some pointers of where you need to define these different elements that we've just explained, here is an overview table of which section of the application form you need to fill in. For our second part of the webinar, we will be looking at the work plan and how to shape it. So first, before we start looking at the different elements that would compose a work plan, it would be convenient to define what we mean by work plan. So the work plan is a reflection of your intervention logic. So remember, it is the design of the action plan that you want to create, and it describes the how and how the project will be delivered concretely, implemented concretely. The work plan is structured around work packages. And as we mentioned previously, these are the main pillars of your project and your project delivery. Each work package is defined and composed by activities, by related deliverables and expected outputs. They all have their own budgets. They must include a description, and will allow the applicant to shape them in number of activities and deliverables, of course within a limit, and for the best way to implement their project. As a reminder here, we would like to also emphasize on the point that cross-referencing between work packages and activities is important, not only in the section D of the application form where the work plan is located, but also with sections of Part C that we mentioned previously in this webinar. We have three types of work packages in the UIA application form. Firstly, we have the horizontal work packages that would include the preparation, closure, management and communication. These work packages do not have the possibility to create outputs. Our second type of work package is the implementation work package. These are the main pillars of your work plan, and you have a maximum of 4 that you can create in order to plan your activities and deliverables and outputs that will be the main core of your project implementation. And lastly, we have the implementation work package. This is a work package that you can choose to create depending on the nature of your project and what you seek to obtain from this project. And it has a specific way of being completed and how the information should be included here. And I will set the basis of this in the following slides. If we look at the work plan and the work packages, especially for the implementation work packages, you should be aware that this is a standardized and repetitive process. And there are a few principles that you should always bear in mind when filling them in. So these work packages should also always state which is the responsible partner and which other partners in your partnership are involved. There's a work package description, summary box, which should be filled in with the correct information and also how they relate to other work packages, including the ones that are horizontal, such as management and communication. When you're working on your work package, you will look that it can be split up into different activities with a maximum of 5 being created. The description of these activities should always involve as well cross-referencing and naming the partner that has the lead role, but also the other partners involved in its development, implementation and delivery. Activities will then be split in deliverables and then potentially in outputs. When you're looking at deliverables, these mean that you are creating what we call the intermediate steps. This allows the reader to know how this activity will be delivered, what are the different elements of this activity, when they will be delivered because you're expected to put a delivery date, and how many, so that is in reference to the target value. What do we mean by target value? We mean, for instance, if you are organizing a training seminar and it's targeted, for instance, at 200 participants, you would put in the target value box 200. If, for instance, as a deliverable, which will lead to an output, and you are planning to put together a report, then you would put as the target value the 1, because you are only aiming to create 1 report. You should also look that the coherence of your delivery dates are in line with what you're planning to do and that they do not contradict any other delivery dates within your work plan. So please make sure that you do a double check before you submit. And also you should provide allocated resources for the work package in its budget section. If we look at the specific case of the investment package, which I mentioned was slightly different to the other work packages, we will see that there are specific sections here that do not apply to the other ones. As we mentioned, the investment work package should only be created in those projects where a real investment is foreseen. And this can include elements such as buildings, such as the renewal of land and etc. So it should be something necessary and justified. So For each investment foreseen, one section should be included and inserted. And different types of information will be requested, such as a general description, a justification for the need of the investment. You will be asked to position your investment and add the location. You should also analyze the risks that these investments entail, and what can be perhaps an obstacle in its delivery. Information on the required documents and permits should also be included, as well as the ownership conditions. As a reminder, the ownership of the investment must remain within the partnership. In this slide, I have included an example of what an activity looks like using a very simple example under the jobs and skills topic. If you will see that there is an activity called the training program for citizens, and you will see that we've included here 4 deliverables, which are those intermediate steps that I mentioned previously. So you see that there are different actions taken, whether it's an analysis or the production of material or recruitment or reports, that will then lead to the output, which, as you will remember from the beginning of this webinar, it's the product that will help to achieve the results. Before concluding this webinar, I wanted to finish on a few points for reminders and tips when putting together your application form and thinking about your intervention logic and work plan. Firstly, we would like to remind you on the style of writing of your proposal. Here you will see a pie chart with some tips on what you should check on once you're writing, but also once you finish and you have a second reading or third reading of your proposal and application form. Why do we say this? Well, we would like to remind you that your application form, once it's submitted to the UIA, will be read by a panel of external experts who will not know your local situation, who will not know what innovative solution you're proposing, and may not understand concretely what your intervention logic is and how you plan to develop it in the work plan. That's why it's always important to ask yourself a few questions before writing, and also once you're revising and overlooking once more your final version of your application form. So there are some pointers and some questions that you should always take into account, but always remember that the person reading it doesn't know your situation. So the clearer you are in your explanation, the more details you provide within the limits of the application form characters, the better it is, because the experts that will be assessing it, as well as the permanent secretariat, will be able to better understand what you want to achieve. So these are some tips for you to take into account. Secondly, we would like to go through a few reminders, which you've already heard about during this webinar, but it's worth just summarizing here at the end. So as I mentioned, include coherent descriptions in each work package, activity, deliverable, and output. Make sure that you do not leave any elements without description or some information, because you may be penalized because of this. Always include those cross-references between Part D and Part C of your application form. Always include cross-references between the work packages, between activities and deliverables. The more cross-references you put, the easier it is for us to understand the logic of your intervention. Always state the partners involved in each work package, but also at activity and deliverable level. We say this because we always want to know how the partners are involved, because this is also part of their involvement in the real delivery of your innovative solution, and it will be scored by the panel of experts during the strategic assessment, but it will also be looked at in the operational assessment that is completed by the UIA Permanent Secretariat. As a word of perhaps recommendation here, when you're looking at the role of partners, it is perhaps a good idea to, when you're creating specifically work package 2 on management, that you make sure that you involve the partners to create your work plan, because they can claim ownership on it and therefore deliver your project in a more coherent way, but also because they will help you fill in all those parts and sections of the application form with their knowledge and experience. So please make sure that you do involve them, because that also enriches your co-design and co-production process, which we've seen in the past has been very beneficial, and that does lead to real innovative solutions in urban authorities in Europe. As one of the last points to remind you on, it would be about the target value. So ensure that you know what you're aiming at and include the right number for your deliverable and output. Here, if you are delivering an output or a deliverable of, and especially, this is especially relevant for deliverables of a repetitive nature, as a recommendation, we would say do not split it in different deliverables, but to put all together in one deliverable. If it's, for instance, a newsletter that you know will be periodical, so every 3 months, you include in your description what is the frequency of this newsletter. And then if you know that you will have, for instance, 12 newsletters, to put that as the target value in a single deliverable, which is a much simpler way of organizing your work plan. And lastly, pay attention to that time sequence of deliverables, activities and outputs, because you don't want, for instance, an output to be delivered before you finished the activity or before you've actually finished the deliverable that will be part of their contribution to that output. As useful resources that you should be aware of and be familiar with, we recommend that you use the UIA guidance document that you will find in the page of the call for proposals on the UIA website. You should be very familiar with this document because it explains every section that we have included in the application form, and also definitions of the different elements that I've gone through today in the webinar. We also recommend that you look at the URBACT guide for applying the results framework to integrated action plans that also provides very useful definitions and examples. So that is, in a nutshell, the intervention logic and work plan from the perspective of the UIA. We hope that this has been a useful webinar for you once you start writing those proposals. As mentioned at the beginning, we will be holding a question and answer session shortly, and more information will be given on the UIA website. Thank you and best of luck to all applicants.